Alright, so in the previous video we have seen how to construct our sign up function and kind of refactor it, that is have more secure way of storing our token as a cookie, right? And yeah, I think we don't need this stuff, so I will remove that. Okay, now let's look at how to create our login functions. Yeah, so first let's define a function called login, and we can use the catch async here as well. So this will be a synchronous function that follows this pattern, and yeah, then we can export this login function as a module. And for the testing purposes, maybe we can have a log. Let's say login called, and let's go back to the routes, and in the routes we have to specify our login like that, and this will be a route with login that is calling this function. Right, now if I go to the Postman and let's create another request, let's say user login, and this is a post request that follows this sort of a URL, but it's login, and the body is basically raw JSON, and let me copy this JSON object and paste it over there. And we don't need name, but let's use email and the password, right? But of course this object won't be used yet because we are simply logging it, right? Yeah, so request is sent, and if you go into the VS Code, yeah, that function is called. Right, so let me cancel this out, and let's go back to the login function. Yeah, now let's start to implement the logic. So first we need to take the email and the password from the request body, right? Then this email and password first should be validated, right? So let's say in case if we haven't mentioned these records in our payload, it must return some sort of error by saying, okay, so you have to provide the email and the password in order to have a successful login, right? So let's first impose that constraint, which means if email is empty or the password is empty, it simply return next app error. So I hope you know now how we can use these app error objects, right? Simply we are passing this app error as an object to our error handling middleware. So that error handling middleware handles all the necessary exceptions for us, right? So this error basically says, let's say, please enter your email and password, right? And it's 401, right? Okay, so let's check that out. So this is a successful login, right? But let me remove the email maybe and send it. Yeah, it simply says please enter your email and password, right? So that exception works. And the next thing is basically we have to check whether the user is exist or not, right? So the second thing is basically check if the user is already exist or not, right? So we can simply do that by taking our user out of the database, right? So this will be await and user dot find one, and we can find the user by the email, right? Okay, so yeah, and let's say if the user is not exist, it simply return another app error for us by simply saying maybe user is not found or something like that, right? And the status code will be maybe 401 or maybe 404. Okay, so we have a user associated with this email, right? Because if you look at the database, we have that user, but let's say Dhanushka1 as Gmail, right? So now we don't have such a user, so it simply says user is not found, right? And yeah, it works as well. And the third constraint is basically we have to check whether the password is correct or not, right? So how we can do that? So simply what we can do is basically we can obtain the password from this user payload or user model or user object, and we can check the hashes associated with this stored password and the password that is sent by the client, right? Then if the hash is matches, which means the password is correct, then we can grant the access to the user. But this is sort of a common logic that is relevant to this specific model, right? User model. So what I can do is that I can implement that logic inside this user model instead of this control, right? Because if I going to implement that specific user model related logic inside this controller, if I wanted to use that logic again, I can't use that because it is exist on this controller file only, right? Therefore, it is better to use such logics inside this model, right? Because it is related to that. And the one thing I have noticed that we by default we have selected this password as false, right? And if you remember in the previous video, if you are trying to retrieve the password without if you are trying to retrieve the user without the password, even that it return that password, right? Simply because I haven't specifically told to the user schema not to return these sort of fields, right? So let's look at that as well, since we encountered that issue. So first what I can do is that first I will show you maybe let me simply response back to the user. So let's say 404, let's say maybe 200, and in the JSON format. So this is just for testing, right? So I will simply return the user if it is exist, right? So let's take that user out from our database. Yeah, now we have that, right? So we have the email and we have the name. Right, I think that won't be an issue, right? Yeah, the password is not there, which means it works, right? Okay, that's weird. But yeah, I think that logic is there somehow. So I think I have missed that, right? I have specifically mentioned this as select false. So yeah, so it doesn't select this password for us, right? But now let's say if we want to select this password back to the user, how we can do that? So what we have to do is basically we have to specifically say to this specific query to select password dash well, right? So you have to specify this plus sign and the specific field that you want. Now if we invoke this function again, so it will return the password back to the user as well, right? Right. So that logic was there. Good. Okay. Now yeah, back to our topic again, which is password checking, right? Yeah, so we have to move to the user model, and yeah, let's construct a specific method to validate these passwords, right? Yeah, so let's create a method. So let's call that maybe not the validator, maybe let's say password check maybe, and this will be a asynchronous function that takes let's say actual password, or let's say yeah, password and the entered, oh no, let's say maybe yeah, I'm a bit confused over there. What we can do? Wait. Right. So yeah, maybe let's take actual. No, maybe let's say password and user entered password, right? So this password means it is the actual password that is stored in the database, and the user entered password means the password that is entered by the user, right? Now we can use the Express.js function called compare. So this compare function automatically do these hash check-ins for us, right? So we don't need to spend more time to implement such logics, right? That's the benefit of using these sort of Node modules inside our applications, right? And yeah, if this comparing is passed, it will return a true, or if this comparing is failed, which means the passwords are distinguished, then it will simply return a false. So I have to return await something like that. I have to do a return await something like that, right? Okay, now the password check function is there, and we can use that function inside our auth controller. So let's go back to the auth controller, and yeah, so let's have another if. Maybe let's say so that the specific function we inherit from the user, right? So user and password check, right? And this is a asynchronous function. Therefore we have to await this as well, and we have to pass the password, which is the first. We have to pass the yeah, I think I have missed the pattern again. I always miss this pattern. So first thing is the user entered password, and the second thing is the password that is stored in the database, right? so I think I have to interchange that logic over there. Sorry about that. Yeah, so in the user model, so this should be user entered password, and this should be the password, right? And the user entered password goes here, and the password goes here. Right, so now let's say comparing. Okay, data is compared to. Okay, so now you can see that first thing is the string, which means user entered password, and the second thing is the hash, which means the hash that is stored in the database, right? So this is a string and this is a hash. So the auth controller, so this is a string, which is a password, this is a hash, right? User.password, right? And it will do the checkings for us, and yeah, we can return some sort of error like that by saying user password is not matching, right? I hope the logic is there, and yeah, let's see how it works. So this is the actual password, right? So if I entered everything correctly, it will simply return yeah, it says password is not matching. Yeah, because I have to make this as not, right? Because if the password is not matching, then it will generate this error for us. Now if I re-invoke the API again, yeah, it simply return the password and the email and the user as usual, right? But yeah, again we have to remove this password from the payload as well. But for now, let's change our password and see whether it is working correctly or not. Yeah, now it says user password is not matching. Alright, it works, but yeah, as I mentioned before, instead of directly passing JSON like that, we have to send a token alongside this login as well, right? Because that token then will be used as authorized key to access the backend resources. Alright, so I will simply copy this line and paste it over here, and yeah, so instead of 201 we have to use 200, which is okay, and instead of new user we have to use the user. Right, now if I try to log in again, it must, yeah, it returns the user and the token. Right, so that's how our logging functionality can be implemented. And yeah, the next video, let's see how we can protect our routes that is only going to accessible via this token, and maybe let's try to apply role-based authentication stuffs as well. Right, so thank you.